Marcus Thompson stood at his post outside the prestigious Wellington Corporate Tower, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched the morning rush of executives hurry past him. At 52, his gray hair was neatly trimmed and his uniform pressed to perfection. But to the thousands of people who passed him daily, he might as well have been invisible furniture. The security guard position at Wellington Corporation was supposed to be temporary, just something to pay the bills after he left his previous career behind. That was 3 years ago. Now, as he watched another group of young executives stride past him without so much as a glance, Marcus had become part of the building's landscape, as unremarkable as the marble pillars that held up the lobby. "Morning, ghost man," sneered Bradley Hutchinson, a junior executive who seemed to take particular pleasure in making Marcus feel small. Bradley was everything Marcus wasn't in this corporate world: young, aggressive, and loud. His expensive suit probably cost more than Marcus made in 2 months, and he never let anyone forget it. Marcus simply nodded in response, as he always did. He had learned long ago that engaging with people like Bradley only made things worse. The young man continued past, already pulling out his phone to make what sounded like an important business call, his voice echoing through the marble lobby. The truth was, Marcus preferred the silence. After 25 years in a world where every word could mean the difference between life and death, where silence was survival, the corporate chatter felt meaningless to him. These people rushed around with their meetings and their deadlines, completely unaware that their biggest worry of the day would be whether their presentation slides were in the right order. Sarah Chen, the building manager, approached his station with her usual clipboard and efficient stride. She was one of the few people in the building who actually spoke to Marcus like he was human, though even she saw him as just another employee to manage. "Marcus, we're having the quarterly board meeting next week," she said, barely looking up from her notes. "Security will need to be extra tight. The CEO of Meridian Industries will be visiting, along with several other high-profile executives. I need you to coordinate with the additional security team we're bringing in." Marcus straightened slightly. He knew Meridian Industries by reputation, a defense contractor with government connections, the kind of company that made enemies in certain circles. "How many additional personnel?" he asked. 6 professional security officers," Sarah replied. "They'll be handling the primary protection detail. You'll just need to manage building access and make sure the perimeter stays secure." She walked away before Marcus could respond, leaving him alone with his thoughts. As he returned to his post, watching the endless stream of people flow past him, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something was different about this upcoming meeting. His instincts, honed by years of training that these corporate executives could never imagine, were telling him to pay attention. The rest of the morning passed quietly. Marcus made his rounds through the building, checking doors, monitoring the security cameras, and maintaining the invisible presence that everyone had come to expect from him. He knew every corner of this building, every exit, every blind spot in the camera coverage. It was second nature to him, the same way he had once known every escape route, every hiding spot, every advantage point in much more dangerous places. During his lunch break, Marcus sat alone in the small security office, eating a simple sandwich while reviewing the building's security protocols. He pulled up the floor plans for the executive conference room where next week's meeting would take place. 42nd floor, corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Multiple access points, including a private elevator that went directly to the executive parking garage. His fingers traced the layout with the precision of someone who had spent years studying similar diagrams, though for very different purposes. In his previous life, he would have been looking for ways in or ways out, calculating distances and sight lines, identifying potential threats and escape routes. Now, he was just a security guard making sure the executives felt safe during their meeting. The afternoon brought its usual parade of visitors, deliveries, and employees returning from lunch. Marcus processed them all with the same quiet efficiency, checking IDs, directing people to the right floors, and maintaining the unremarkable presence that had become his trademark. Around 4 o'clock, Bradley Hutchinson returned from what appeared to be a liquid lunch with clients. His expensive suit was rumpled, his tie loosened, and his voice louder than usual as he approached the security desk with 2 other executives Marcus didn't recognize. "You see that guy there?" Bradley said, pointing directly at Marcus while talking to his companions. "That's our resident statue. Been standing there for 3 years, never says a word. I don't think he's ever had a real job in his life. Probably can't even tie his own shoes without help." The other executives chuckled, though they seemed uncomfortable with Bradley's obvious cruelty. Marcus continued checking his computer screen, appearing not to hear the conversation happening just feet away from him. "Watch this," Bradley continued, emboldened by his audience. He walked directly up to Marcus's desk and slammed his hand down on the surface. "Hey, security guard! My car is parked wrong in the garage. Go fix it for me." Marcus looked up slowly, meeting Bradley's bloodshot eyes with his own steady gaze. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hutchinson, but parking arrangement isn't part of my duties. You'll need to contact building maintenance if there's an issue with your parking space." "See what I mean?" Bradley said, turning back to his friends. "No initiative, no backbone. This guy wouldn't last 5 minutes in the real world. Probably spent his whole life in jobs like this, pushing papers, watching monitors, doing what he's told." One of the other executives, clearly uncomfortable with the scene, tried to redirect the conversation. "Come on, Brad. We should get upstairs. The client presentation is in 20 minutes. But Bradley wasn't finished. The alcohol had loosened his tongue and amplified his natural tendency toward cruelty. "I bet this guy has never done anything important in his entire life. Look at him. Afraid of his own shadow. Probably sleeps with a nightlight." Marcus remained perfectly still throughout the entire exchange. His face showed no emotion, no anger, no hurt. To anyone watching, he appeared completely unaffected by the verbal assault. But deep inside, in places he had learned to lock away years ago, something stirred. Not anger. He had dealt with far worse insults from far more dangerous people, but a kind of sadness for how little these people understood about the world they lived in and how safely they could afford to be cruel. After the executives finally left for their meeting, Marcus returned to his duties. He completed his evening rounds, logged the day's incidents, there were none worth noting, and prepared to hand over his shift to the night security guard. As he walked to his car in the parking garage, Marcus reflected on the day's events. Tomorrow would be much the same. Another day of being invisible, another day of being dismissed by people who couldn't imagine that he had ever been anything other than what they saw. But next week would be different. Next week, there would be a high-profile meeting with defense contractors and government connections. Next week, his old instincts were telling him, might be the week when his past and present finally collided in ways that none of these corporate executives could possibly imagine. Marcus drove home to his small apartment, where the walls were bare except for a single framed photograph that he kept turned face down on his dresser. Some memories, he had learned, were better left undisturbed. Some parts of a man's past were better left invisible, just like the man himself had learned to be. The next morning would bring another day of standing at his post, another day of being dismissed and ignored. But Marcus Thompson, if that was even his real name, had learned patience in places where impatience meant death. He could wait. He could watch. And when the time came, these people who saw him as nothing more than a silent guard would learn that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones you never see coming. The week leading up to the board meeting passed with unusual tension in the Wellington corporate tower. Marcus noticed things that others missed. Additional surveillance equipment being installed, background checks being run on all building staff, and subtle changes in the behavior of the executives. Sarah Chen had been making more frequent rounds, her clipboard replaced by a tablet that she guarded carefully. Marcus continued his daily routine, but his senses were heightened in ways he hadn't experienced since leaving his former life. The additional security team arrived on Tuesday for preliminary sweeps and briefings. 6 men in expensive suits, wearing earpieces and moving with the practiced efficiency of professional protection details. They treated Marcus exactly as he expected, with polite dismissal, seeing him as part of the building infrastructure rather than a security asset. "You the regular building security?" asked the team leader, a broad-shouldered man named Stevens, who carried himself with military bearing. His eyes swept over Marcus's simple uniform and unremarkable appearance with barely concealed disdain. "Yes, sir," Marcus replied quietly. "I've been briefed on the additional protocols for the meeting." Stevens nodded absently, already turning his attention to more important matters. "Just stay at your post and keep the lobby clear. We'll handle everything upstairs. This is a federal-level security situation, way above your clearance level." As the days progressed, Marcus observed the security team's preparations with growing unease. They were competent enough, following standard protection protocols for corporate executives, but their focus was entirely on known threats, disgruntled employees, corporate espionage, protesters. They were preparing for conventional dangers in a conventional way. Marcus's instincts, sharpened by years in places where conventional wisdom got people killed, were screaming that they were missing something crucial. The feeling grew stronger each day, a nagging certainty that the real threat wasn't going to come from the directions they were watching. On Thursday morning, 2 days before the meeting, Marcus was reviewing security camera feeds when he noticed something that made him pause. A maintenance worker he didn't recognize was accessing the building's utility areas, spaces that even Marcus rarely entered. The man's credentials checked out when Marcus called building management, but something about his movements bothered him. That evening, Marcus stayed late to review more of the security footage. The maintenance worker had been in the building for 3 days, always working alone, always in areas that would give him access to the building's infrastructure. His work orders were legitimate, his credentials valid, but his behavior pattern was wrong. He moved like someone conducting reconnaissance rather than routine maintenance. Marcus made a decision that surprised him. For the first time in 3 years, he broke his own rule about staying invisible. He approached Stevens during the security team's evening briefing. "I need to show you something," Marcus said, interrupting a discussion about perimeter security. Stevens looked annoyed. "What is it?" "We're busy here." Marcus pulled up the security footage on his tablet. "This maintenance worker, something's not right about his access pattern." Stevens glanced at the screen for perhaps 10 seconds before dismissing it. "Credentials check out. Building management approved his work orders. We don't have time for paranoid theories from building security." "If you'll just look at the movement patterns," Marcus began. "Look." Stevens cut him off, his voice taking on a condescending tone that Marcus had heard too many times in recent years. "I appreciate that you want to be helpful, but this is professional security work. We've got federal protocols to follow, real threats to assess. You just keep doing your job, checking IDs and watching the front door." The other members of the security team exchanged glances that Marcus could read easily enough. To them, he was just an aging rent-a-cop trying to insert himself into important matters beyond his understanding. Marcus returned to his post without argument, but the feeling in his gut only grew stronger. He spent the rest of the evening studying building schematics, identifying every possible access point, every vulnerability that a determined attacker might exploit. His fingers moved across the blueprints with the muscle memory of someone who had spent years planning and preventing exactly these kinds of operations. Friday morning arrived with heightened security throughout the building. The professional team had established checkpoints, swept the meeting room multiple times, and coordinated with local law enforcement. Everything appeared to be under control. Marcus took his position at the lobby security desk at 6 a.m., 2 hours earlier than usual. The building was still largely empty, with only essential staff and the security team present. He watched the morning news on his small monitor while monitoring the building's camera feeds, noting that the mysterious maintenance worker had not returned since Thursday. The executives began arriving around 9 a.m. Marcus processed each one through the additional security protocols, extra ID checks, bag searches, and metal detector screenings. Bradley Hutchinson arrived with his usual swagger, apparently viewing the enhanced security as an exciting change to his routine. "Feels like we're in a spy movie," Bradley commented loudly to a colleague as he passed through the metal detector. "All this security for one meeting. Hope they're paying these guys enough to keep us safe from whatever corporate secrets are worth stealing." By 10 a.m., all the meeting participants had arrived and been escorted to the 42nd floor. The Meridian Industries CEO, a silver-haired man named Richard Caldwell, had arrived with his own security detail, adding even more professional protection to an already heavily defended meeting. Marcus settled in for what he expected to be a long, quiet morning of monitoring an empty lobby. The real action was happening 42 floors above him, where executives would discuss defense contracts and government partnerships in a room surrounded by enough security personnel to stop any conventional threat. At 10:47 a.m., Marcus's world changed forever. The building's fire alarm system activated, but not in the way it was designed to. Instead of the standard building-wide alert, only specific zones were triggered, zones that would force the evacuation of key security personnel while leaving other areas apparently safe. Marcus recognized the pattern immediately. It was a diversion tactic designed to pull resources away from the primary target. While the professional security team was responding to what they assumed was a standard fire alarm malfunction, Marcus was analyzing the alarm pattern on his security console. The zones being triggered formed a specific sequence that would draw security personnel away from the executive floor while creating confusion about the building's actual status. Then Marcus saw him. On camera monitor 7, in a service corridor that most people didn't know existed, was the maintenance worker from the previous days. But now he wasn't carrying maintenance tools. He was carrying a long black case and moving with the precise efficiency of someone executing a carefully planned operation. Marcus's blood ran cold as his training kicked in. The case was exactly the right size and shape for a disassembled sniper rifle. The maintenance worker had spent 3 days mapping the building, identifying sight lines, and establishing his position. Now, while security was distracted by the false alarm, he was moving into position for what would be a perfect shot. Marcus grabbed his radio to alert Stevens and the security team, but found only static. The building's communication systems had been disrupted, another element of the plan that the professional security team hadn't anticipated. For a moment, Marcus sat frozen at his desk, caught between the invisible life he had built and the skills that had once defined him. Every instinct told him that people were about to die, that this was exactly the kind of sophisticated attack that required someone with his specific background to stop. But he was just a security guard, an invisible man in a pressed uniform who was supposed to check IDs and watch monitors. Getting involved would mean revealing abilities and knowledge that he had spent 3 years keeping buried. The decision, when it came, wasn't really a decision at all. It was muscle memory, 25 years of training overriding 3 years of hiding. Marcus stood up from his desk, his movements suddenly sharp and purposeful in a way that would have shocked anyone who had been paying attention. But there was no one in the lobby to see the transformation as the invisible security guard became someone else entirely, someone who had once been considered one of the deadliest men alive. He moved toward the service elevator with the fluid efficiency of a predator, every step calculated, every sense alert. The hunt was on, and for the first time in 3 years, Marcus Thompson was no longer invisible. Marcus moved through the building like a ghost, using service corridors and maintenance passages that he had memorized during his 3 years of invisible observation. The skills that had once made him legendary in covert operations came flooding back. How to move without sound, how to anticipate an enemy's positioning, how to turn a building's own infrastructure into a tactical advantage. The maintenance worker, whose real name Marcus suspected was neither on his credentials nor known to anyone in the building, had chosen his position brilliantly. The service corridor on the 38th floor provided a perfect sight line to the executive conference room 4 floors above, while remaining completely invisible to the conventional security sweeps that Stevens's team had conducted. As Marcus climbed the service stairs, his mind was already calculating distances, angles, and timing. The shooter would have a window of opportunity when the executives moved to the conference room's windows for their traditional photo opportunity, something that was scheduled for exactly 11:15 a.m., according to the meeting agenda that Marcus had memorized. That gave him less than 20 minutes to reach the shooter's position and neutralize the threat. Marcus's movement through the building was a masterclass in tactical infiltration that no one was there to witness. He avoided security cameras by using blind spots he had identified during months of seemingly casual observation, disabled motion sensors with techniques learned in places where getting caught meant death, and navigated the building's layout with the precision of someone who had been studying it as a battlefield rather than a workplace. When he reached the 37th floor, Marcus paused to assess the situation above him. Through the building's internal communication system, he could hear the confused chatter of Stevens's security team as they tried to understand why the fire alarms had activated in such an unusual pattern. They were still thinking like corporate security, following protocols designed for conventional threats. Marcus pulled out his personal cell phone, something he had never used during work hours in 3 years of employment, and dialed a number he had memorized but never called. "Control," answered a voice that Marcus hadn't heard in years but recognized immediately. "Phantom 7 requesting immediate assistance," Marcus said quietly, using a call sign he thought he had buried forever. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Phantom 7 was retired. Status deceased. "Status very much alive and currently engaged," Marcus replied. "Need building schematics for Wellington Corporate Tower uploaded to my device. Hostile sniper in position. Civilians in immediate danger." Another pause, followed by rapid keystrokes. "Jesus, Marcus. What the hell are you doing in a corporate tower? Long story? Can you help or not?" "Schematics uploading now. What's your operational status?" Marcus looked down at his security guard uniform, then up at the ceiling that separated him from a professional assassin who was about to kill a room full of people. "Improvising." The building schematics appeared on his phone with detail that far exceeded what the building management had in their files. Marcus could see exactly where the shooter had positioned himself, the angles he had available, and most importantly, the structural weaknesses that could be exploited. Marcus ended the call and continued his ascent, but now his movement was guided by intelligence that turned the building into a 3-dimensional battlefield. He knew exactly where the shooter was, how he would be positioned, and what his escape route would be after the assassination. On the 38th floor, Marcus could hear the almost inaudible sound of someone moving with professional stealth just 50 feet away. The shooter was in final position, probably assembling his rifle and calculating his shot. Marcus had perhaps 10 minutes before the executives moved to the windows. The corridor where the shooter had positioned himself was a dead end, with only one access point, perfect for avoiding detection, but also perfect for a trap. Marcus studied the building schematic on his phone and found what he was looking for, a maintenance shaft that would put him directly above the shooter's position. Getting into the shaft required Marcus to remove a ceiling panel in a supply closet, something that would normally trigger building security alerts. But his 3 years of studying the building's systems paid off as he disabled the sensor with a technique that would look like routine maintenance malfunction to anyone reviewing the logs later. Marcus pulled himself into the narrow maintenance shaft with the fluid efficiency of someone who had once specialized in urban infiltration. The space was cramped and dark, but he moved through it as comfortably as if it were open ground. Above him, building infrastructure hummed quietly. Electrical conduits, ventilation ducts, and fiber optic cables that formed the nervous system of the modern office building. Through a ventilation grate, Marcus could see directly down into the corridor where the shooter had established his position. The man was exactly where Marcus had predicted. A disassembled sniper rifle laid out on a maintenance table as he prepared for the shot. He was good. His movements were efficient and professional, and his position provided perfect concealment from any conventional security sweep. But Marcus wasn't conventional security. At 11:12 a.m., Marcus heard the sound of elevator doors opening 42 floors above him, followed by the muffled voices of executives moving toward the conference room windows. In 3 minutes, they would be perfectly positioned for assassination, and Stevens's security team was still 4 floors away, trying to figure out why their communication systems weren't working properly. Marcus made his decision. He carefully removed the ventilation grate, using a technique that made no sound whatsoever, and dropped silently into the corridor behind the shooter. His years of tactical training had taught him how to fall without sound, how to land without impact, how to move like death itself. The shooter sensed something at the last possible moment, some primitive instinct warning him that he was no longer alone. He began to turn, his hand moving toward the sidearm holstered at his waist, but he was moving in normal time while Marcus was moving in the accelerated time of combat. Marcus's hand found the shooter's throat before the man could complete his turn, applying pressure to specific points that would render him unconscious without killing him. It was over in less than 3 seconds, the would-be assassin collapsing silently to the floor as his rifle clattered harmlessly beside him. Marcus quickly secured the weapon and checked the shooter's identification. As expected, the credentials were false, but the man's equipment was highly professional, the kind of gear that suggested government training and serious financial backing. This wasn't a lone wolf or a corporate spy. This was someone sent by people who could afford the very best. Through his earpiece, Marcus could hear Stevens's security team finally beginning to coordinate their response to the building's communication failures. In a few minutes, they would realize that the fire alarms had been a diversion, but by then it would have been too late. Marcus zip-tied the unconscious shooter and positioned him where the arriving security team would find him. Then he made his way back through the maintenance passages toward the lobby, moving as invisibly as he had arrived. By the time Stevens and his team reached the 38th floor, Marcus was back at his security desk, reviewing camera footage and appearing to conduct routine monitoring. The unconscious shooter would be found with his weapon, and the threat would be neutralized, but there would be no obvious explanation for how it had happened. At 11:47 a.m., Marcus watched through the security cameras as Stevens's team discovered the would-be assassin. He could see the confusion on their faces as they tried to understand how a professional killer had been subdued and secured without any apparent intervention from their security detail. Marcus allowed himself a small smile as he watched Stevens speaking rapidly into his radio, probably trying to explain to his supervisors how they had simultaneously failed to detect a sniper and somehow managed to stop an assassination attempt they never knew was happening. The executives in the conference room continued their meeting, completely unaware that they had been minutes away from death. Bradley Hutchinson and his colleagues would go on thinking that the enhanced security had been an overreaction to a non-existent threat. But Marcus knew better. As he sat at his desk, once again invisible and unremarkable, he understood that his past had finally caught up with his present. Someone had sent a professional killer to this building, and the fact that the target had been a defense contractor suggested connections to his former life that he couldn't ignore. The quiet security guard who had spent 3 years being dismissed and overlooked had just prevented what could have been an international incident. But as Marcus returned to his routine of checking IDs and monitoring cameras, he realized that his cover was about to be blown in ways he couldn't have imagined, because someone somewhere, was going to want to know exactly how an aging security guard had managed to neutralize one of the world's most dangerous assassins. The investigation began within hours. By 2 p.m., the building was crawling with federal agents, corporate security investigators, and forensic specialists trying to piece together exactly what had happened on the 38th floor. Marcus watched it all from his security desk, maintaining his invisible presence, while listening to increasingly frustrated conversations between investigators who couldn't explain their evidence. Stevens was having the worst day of his professional career. His security team had been outmaneuvered by a sophisticated attack, but somehow the threat had been neutralized by unknown means. The shooter, who refused to speak and had no identification beyond his false credentials, had been found unconscious and secured with military-grade restraints that no one could account for. "The forensics don't make sense," Marcus overheard Stevens telling a federal agent during one of their hushed conversations near the lobby. "Professional restraint techniques, perfect positioning to prevent escape, but no evidence of how anyone accessed that corridor. It's like the guy was taken down by a ghost." Marcus continued his routine duties, checking IDs and monitoring camera feeds while the investigation swirled around him. Several federal agents had interviewed him as part of their comprehensive questioning of all building personnel, but his answers had been exactly what they expected from a simple security guard. He had seen nothing unusual, heard nothing suspicious, and had no insight into sophisticated security matters. But Marcus's invisible act was about to face its greatest test. At 4:30 p.m., a woman in an expensive suit approached his desk with the confident stride of someone accustomed to getting answers. She was in her 40s, with sharp eyes that missed nothing, and she carried herself with the authority of someone who had clearance levels that most people couldn't imagine. "Mr. Thompson," she said, her voice carrying just enough edge to indicate that this wasn't a casual conversation. "I'm Agent Sarah Morrison, FBI Counterterrorism Division. I'd like to ask you a few questions." Marcus looked up from his computer screen with the mild curiosity of someone unused to being the center of attention. "Of course, ma'am. Happy to help however I can." Agent Morrison studied his face with the intensity of someone trained to read deception. "You've been working in this building for 3 years. In that time, have you ever noticed anything unusual about the maintenance staff?" "Not really," Marcus replied with the measured tone of someone trying to be helpful without claiming knowledge he shouldn't have. "They keep pretty regular schedules. Most of them I've gotten to know by sight over the years." "What about this week specifically? Any new faces? Any changes in routine?" Marcus appeared to consider the question carefully. There was someone new the past few days. Older gentleman. Working on electrical systems, I think. Had all the right credentials when I checked them. Morrison nodded, making notes in a small tablet. "Did you interact with this person at all? Any conversations?" "Just the standard check-in when he first arrived. Seemed professional enough. Quiet type." "Mr. Thompson," Morrison said, her tone shifting slightly. "What's your background before you started working here?" It was the question Marcus had been expecting, but it still sent a small chill through him. "Previous job was warehouse security for a logistics company that went out of business. Before that, various security and maintenance positions. Nothing too exciting." Morrison was studying him more intently now, her instincts clearly telling her that something wasn't quite right. "Any military service?" "No, ma'am." "Never served." It was a lie that would have been easy to verify if Morrison had reason to dig deeper, but Marcus was counting on appearing too unremarkable to warrant that level of investigation. He maintained eye contact without tension, his body language suggesting nothing more than a working man trying to be helpful to federal authorities. "The thing is, Mr. Thompson," Morrison continued, "we're dealing with a very sophisticated attack here. Professional-level expertise, expensive equipment, extensive planning. The person who stopped this attack would have needed specialized training and considerable skill." Marcus nodded sympathetically. Makes sense that you'd want to be thorough. Scary to think something like that could happen here. Morrison was about to continue her questioning when Stevens approached with obvious frustration written across his face. Agent Morrison, we've finished reviewing all the security footage. There's no visual record of anyone accessing that corridor during the time frame when the subject was neutralized. It's like he was taken down by someone who knew exactly how to avoid our camera coverage. That's impossible, Morrison replied. No one knows this building's security layout that well except... She stopped mid-sentence, her eyes snapping back to Marcus with sudden suspicion. Marcus could see the moment when her investigative instincts started connecting dots that shouldn't have been connectable. Mr. Thompson, she said slowly, you've had access to the building's complete security system for 3 years. You would know every camera angle, every blind spot, every access route that might not appear on standard blueprints. Marcus felt the conversation shifting into dangerous territory, but he maintained his mild expression. I suppose that's true, though I mostly just monitor the main areas. Don't really think about the technical side too much. Morrison was now studying Marcus with the focused attention of a predator who had caught an interesting scent. Stevens, I need you to pull Mr. Thompson's complete employment records, background check, references, everything. Already did that when we hired him, Stevens replied, consulting his tablet. Marcus Thompson, age 52, previous employment at Hartwell Logistics, Denver, clean record, no issues. But Morrison was no longer listening to Stevens. She was watching Marcus's face with the intensity of someone who had just realized that the most important piece of evidence had been sitting in front of her all along. Mr. Thompson, she said quietly, I'm going to need you to come with me for additional questioning. Marcus could feel his carefully constructed invisible life beginning to collapse around him. 3 years of being overlooked and dismissed were about to end because he had made the choice to save lives instead of maintaining his cover. As he stood up from his security desk, Marcus caught a glimpse of Bradley Hutchinson walking through the lobby with several other executives, apparently returning from their successful meeting. Bradley glanced toward the federal agents with mild curiosity, probably wondering what kind of excitement he had missed during his important business discussions. If Bradley or any of the other executives had paid attention, they might have noticed something strange about their invisible security guard as he walked away with federal agents. His posture was different, straighter, more controlled. His movements had a precision that didn't match the unremarkable man they had dismissed for 3 years. But they weren't paying attention, just as they never had. To them, Marcus Thompson was still just part of the building's furniture, too unimportant to notice even when he was being led away by the FBI. 3 hours later, Marcus sat in a federal interrogation room while Agent Morrison reviewed a computer screen that contained information far beyond anything that should have existed for a simple security guard. The facial recognition software had finally found what it was looking for, cross-referencing databases that most people didn't know existed. Sergeant Major Marcus Phantom Harrison, Morrison read from the screen. British Special Air Service Counter-Revolutionary Warfare Wing. Operational record classified at levels I don't even have access to. Officially declared killed in action 3 years ago during a classified operation. She looked up from the computer screen to study the man she had known for the past few hours as Marcus Thompson. You're supposed to be dead. Marcus met her gaze steadily. Marcus Thompson is a security guard at the Wellington Corporate Tower. Has been for 3 years. He checks IDs and watches monitors and gets dismissed by people who think he's invisible. And Sergeant Major Harrison? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, considering how much truth he was willing to reveal. Sergeant Major Harrison completed his last mission and was retired from active service. What happened in that building today was Marcus Thompson doing his job, keeping people safe. Morrison leaned back in her chair, trying to process the implications of what she had discovered. The shooter we captured is a known international assassin. Goes by the name Kozlov, though that's probably not his real name either. He's wanted in connection with at least 6 high-profile killings across 3 continents. Professional, expensive, and very good at what he does. Was good at what he did, Marcus corrected quietly. The question is, Morrison continued, why was someone of Kozlov's caliber sent to kill executives at a corporate meeting? And why did his target happen to be in the same building as one of the SAS's most decorated snipers? Marcus had been wondering the same thing. The targeting of Meridian Industries executives suggested connections to defense contracts, possibly involving technology or operations that someone didn't want to proceed. The fact that they had sent Kozlov indicated that whoever was behind this had serious resources and international connections. I think, Marcus said carefully, that someone made a very expensive mistake. Morrison's phone buzzed with an incoming message that she read quickly, her expression growing more serious. The executives who were targeted today, their meeting wasn't about standard defense contracts. They were finalizing agreements for a joint counterterrorism initiative involving classified surveillance technology. She looked up from her phone to study Marcus's face. The kind of technology that might be used to track down international assassins and the people who hire them. Marcus understood now why Kozlov had been sent, and why the attack had been so sophisticated. Someone with significant resources was trying to prevent surveillance technology that could expose their operations. They had hired the best assassin they could find, and planned an attack that should have been unstoppable. They hadn't counted on their target being protected by someone who had spent 25 years hunting people exactly like them. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Morrison closed her tablet and studied the man who had spent 3 years successfully hiding in plain sight. Now we have a conversation about what Marcus Thompson wants to do with the rest of his life, because there are people who would very much like to meet the man who single-handedly stopped an international assassination. Outside the interrogation room, the world continued to spin as it always had. At the Wellington corporate tower, the evening security guard had taken over Marcus's post, processing the last few employees leaving the building after an unusually exciting day. Bradley Hutchinson walked past the security desk without a second glance, already planning his evening and looking forward to telling people about the federal investigation at his office building. It would be a great story for weekend parties. How close he had come to real danger, how important his meeting had been to attract that level of attention. He would never know that the invisible security guard he had mocked and dismissed for 3 years had been the only thing standing between him and death. He would never know that the man he had called a coward and a failure was one of the most decorated soldiers in British military history. Marcus Thompson, the invisible security guard, had ceased to exist the moment he chose to save lives instead of maintaining his cover. But Sergeant Major Marcus Harrison, who had never really died, was about to begin a new chapter in a story that was far from over. Because in a world where shadows held more danger than most people could imagine, sometimes the most important protectors were the ones you never saw coming.